My aunt tricked me into giving her custody of my autistic sister. Then she let her husband do whatever he wanted, so I went undercover to expose them. Now she's calling me from jail, begging me to fix her life. My younger sister was 8 when I first bullied her for having autism, except at the time, I thought it was just quirky traits she had. So whenever she wasn't able to make eye contact, I would point at her and say, "Oh, are you scared we're all secretly Medusa?" and cackle at the top of my lungs. So one day we were at the mall and she had a full breakdown because she could feel a rock in her Doc Marten. That's when I realized she probably had a case of the tism, but instead of telling our parents, I tried to get her diagnosed myself. You see, I was 18 at the time, and our parents were pretty much those insane hippies you see on TV. One time I had a really bad case of the flu, and instead of bringing me to the doctor, they poured cayenne pepper into my belly button. And the next day when they noticed that it didn't work, my dad started wailing on me to beat the sickness out of me. So I knew going to them about potential autism would put Mia in danger. Luckily, the school counselor was extremely helpful. It was actually a relief when she got diagnosed, because then I knew how to better take care of her. I remember working almost 40 hours in overtime that week just to buy her top-tier noise-canceling headphones that she could wear whenever she felt overstimulated. And in secret, I'd bring her into the locked bathroom to teach her how to self-regulate. Looking back, I should have known that it was just a band-aid solution, that it would all come crashing down. One day I told Mia we could watch Cinderella, her favorite movie, since I had the entire day off of work. Suddenly, she started flapping both of her hands super hard like a bird, screaming super high-pitched. I glanced over at my parents whose eyebrows were furrowed, so in a moment of quick thinking, I began to mimic her exact verbal and physical reaction, pretending it was a quirky inside joke. The whole thing made me realize how much help Mia really needed, so I started taking up more shifts to pay for her therapy. It was the first time my parents would be home alone with her for long periods of time, but I thought it would be fine, because girls with autism are typically better at masking anyway. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. I was at the cash register arguing with a customer when I heard my phone ring. It was Mia. Immediately, a gut feeling washed over me, because she knew not to call me at work unless for emergencies. When I picked up, I could barely hear her, because she was crying harder than ever, begging me to come home. But before I could ask for more detail, I heard a man yelling in the background. She hung up. The drive home was 30 minutes, but I made it in 20. I ran up the stairs looking for Mia, but as I did, I heard a faint banging. It was coming from the closet underneath the stairs. I knew my parents thought I was still at work, so I quietly opened the door and Mia ran out, jumping into my arms. I put my finger over her mouth to shush her, and she just nodded like she understood. So there I was, holding a 10-year-old girl with low-functioning autism, not knowing what the F to do. So I did the first thing I could think of, and quietly carried her out to my car. Turns out, my parents had asked my sister what was going on, and she burst out with the truth, that she had been secretly diagnosed with autism. My dad's hand immediately hit her face. "She's going to poison Jack," my name, my mom yelled, hence why they put her in the closet. Apparently, they were waiting for me to come home to see what they should do with her. I felt myself sniffle and choke to hold back tears when she said that, because I knew I had to stay strong. I told her that she would always be safe with me, and no one would ever hurt her again. She held my hand tighter, and I knew she believed me, but I still didn't know what to do, so I just scrolled through my contact list to see what family member would take us in. I ended up deciding on our Aunt Leah, because she herself was a little quirky too. I didn't waste any time and told her exactly what was going on with Mia. She seemed really understanding. I should have known that no one is that friendly to someone they hadn't seen in a while. She told me she'd be happy to take in Mia, but I couldn't stay, because she didn't want men in her house. I told her I respected her wishes, and I would be back too. The last image I saw was Mia running excitedly to hang out with Aunt Leah's daughter, and I never saw her again. Not really anyway, because after what Leah did, she was never the same. The next day, she called me from her school, crying even harder than after the incident with our parents. "Jack?" Her voice was barely audible through sobs. I sat up straight, fully awake now. "What's wrong? Are you okay?" She couldn't even form words, just these gasping, hiccuping sobs. I told her to breathe, that I was coming to get her right now. Between gasps, she managed to say she didn't feel safe. That was all I needed to hear. I thanked Darren for letting me crash on his couch, grabbed my keys, and bolted. The morning air hit my face as I sprinted to my hit-up Honda, the one I'd bought with 3 summers worth of lawn mowing money. The whole drive to her school, my mind was racing with horrible possibilities. What could have happened in less than 24 hours? Aunt Leah had seemed so nice, so understanding when I'd dropped Mia off yesterday. She'd even made Mia's favorite mac and cheese for dinner. When I got to the school office, Mia was sitting in a plastic chair, hugging herself, rocking slightly back and forth. Her purple glasses were sliding down her nose, and her dark hair was falling out of the careful braids I'd done yesterday morning. The secretary gave me a concerned look over her computer monitor. I signed Mia out, scribbling something illegible on their form. As soon as she saw me, she ran over and clung to me like I was a life raft in the middle of the ocean. "Let's get out of here," I whispered, and she nodded against my shirt, her small hands gripping the fabric so tightly her knuckles were white. In the car, I tried to get her to tell me what happened, but she just shook her head. She wouldn't even look at me, just stared out the window, occasionally tapping her fingers against her thigh in that familiar pattern she used when she was overwhelmed. Every time I mentioned going back to Aunt Leah's, she'd start trembling. Something was seriously wrong. We ended up at a McDonald's because I figured she needed to eat something. Plus, the playground area was empty since it was a school day. I bought her a Happy Meal, and we sat in the corner booth, far away from the handful of other other customers. She picked at her food, not really eating, just moving the chicken nuggets around in their cardboard container. Mia, please, I need to know what happened so I can help you. She stared at her untouched nuggets for what felt like forever, her eyes focused on some invisible point. Then, in the smallest voice I'd ever heard from her, she whispered, Uncle Rob likes to practice boxing. I felt my stomach drop. What do you mean practice boxing? Mia finally looked up at me, her eyes red and puffy behind her glasses. He said it was a game, that I needed to hold my arms up like this. She demonstrated a boxing stance, her small arms raised defensively in front of her face, to train my reflexes. I tried to keep my voice steady, though inside I was already seething. And then what happened? It was okay at first. He would just tap my arms, but then she trailed off, looking down again, her finger tracing a pattern on the table. Last night he hit me for real, in the stomach. He said I wasn't blocking right, my hands clenched into fists under the table. I wanted to drive straight to Leah's house and hit the crap out of Rob, but I knew that wouldn't help Mia. I needed to be smart about this. Did you tell Aunt Leah? Mia nodded, a single tear sliding down her cheek. She said I was making it up for attention, that I was. She struggled with the word. Manipulative. That's when I realized we couldn't go back there, but I also couldn't call the police. If they investigated and found out I'd essentially kidnapped Mia from our parents, they might send her back there. Or worse, put her in foster care. I'd heard horror stories about how kids with special needs were treated in the system. Kids like Mia, who needed routine, who had meltdowns when things got too loud or bright or overwhelming. We spent that night in a cheap motel off the highway, the kind with flickering neon signs and bedspreads that had probably seen better days in the early 90s. I used most of my paycheck to book it for 3 nights, wincing as I handed over my debit card. Mia had nightmares and woke up crying twice. I sat with her, letting her squeeze my hand until she fell back asleep, her face finally peaceful in the blue glow of the muted TV. The next morning, I decided I needed to confront Rob. I wasn't going to let him get away with hurting my sister. I dropped Mia off at the library with some books and snacks, telling her I'd be back in an hour. The children's librarian seemed nice, giving Mia a gentle smile when she explained she liked books about space and dinosaurs. I made sure she had my phone number and the motel address written down, just in case. Before heading to Leah's, I stopped at a convenience store and bought a cheap burner phone. I tucked it into my shirt pocket, with the voice recorder app running. I wasn't sure if it would be admissible in court or anything, but I wanted evidence. Something concrete that couldn't be dismissed as a misunderstanding or an overreaction. When I pulled up to Leah's house, my hands were shaking on the steering wheel. The suburban street looked so normal, with kids' bikes in driveways and American flags fluttering from porches. I took a deep breath and reminded myself I was doing this for Mia. I rang the doorbell and waited, shifting my weight from foot to foot. Rob answered, looking annoyingly casual in a bathrobe, coffee mug in hand. He was a big guy, probably in his 40s, with a beer gut and thinning hair. Not at all what I'd pictured as a boxer. His eyes narrowed when he saw me standing there. Jack, right? Leah's not here. She's out looking for your sister. His tone was accusatory, as if I was the one who'd done something wrong. I know where Mia is. She's safe. He crossed his arms, the fabric of his robe pulling tight across his shoulders. Safe from what? We were taking good care of her until you filled her head with nonsense. I cut right to the chase. She told me about your boxing practice. A smirk spread across his face, and I had to resist the urge to punch it off him. Oh, that? Just a little discipline. The kid needs structure. She was acting up, making weird noises, not looking people in the eye. Someone's gotta teach her how to act normal. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This guy was openly admitting to hitting a 10-year-old autistic girl, my sister. You had no right to touch her. He leaned against the doorframe, taking a sip of his coffee. Look, kid, your sister's messed up in the head. Sometimes a little physical correction is what these types need. I was about to lose it when I heard a car pull into the driveway, tires crunching on gravel. Leah got out, slamming her door with enough force to make the windows rattle. You! She shouted, marching up to me, her face flushed with anger. Where is Mia? I've been driving all over looking for her. Before I could answer, she slapped me hard across the face, the sound echoing in the quiet neighborhood. You're turning her against family. What kind of sick game are you playing? Rob put his arm around her, pulling her close. He's the unstable one, honey. I told you. Leah pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling with rage. I'm calling the police. You can't just take her from her legal guardian. Legal guardian? I brought her here voluntarily. And I filed emergency temporary guardianship papers this morning. She shot back. The court approved them given your parents' situation and your history. What history? The history of mental instability I detailed in my statement. How you've been having delusions, making up stories about abuse that never happened. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She was setting me up. And the worst part was, it was working. The cops showed up within minutes, their cruiser pulling up with lights flashing but no siren. They asked for my side of the story, but when I mentioned the recording, they told me it was inadmissible because Virginia is a 2-party consent state. I'd recorded them without their knowledge, which was apparently illegal. The cops told me I had to leave or they'd arrest me for trespassing. As they escorted me off the property, Leah stood in the doorway with a smug expression, Rob's arm still around her shoulders. I had never felt so helpless in my life. That night, I checked my phone to find Leah had posted on Facebook. It was this long, vague status about how some people with mental health issues can become dangerous, and how she was protecting her family from someone who kidnapped a child under false pretenses. She never mentioned me by name, but everyone in our extended family knew who she was talking about. The comments were filled with supportive messages. Stay strong, praying for you. Some people are just toxic. These people had no idea what was really happening. They were supporting a woman who was letting her husband and abuse a child, my sister, the one person I had sworn to protect. I picked up Mia from the library and we went back to the motel. I didn't tell her about what happened with Rob and Leah. I didn't want to scare her more, but that night she had the worst meltdown I'd ever seen. It started when I accidentally turned the TV volume too high. She covered her ears and started rocking back and forth, her eyes squeezed shut. Then she slid off the bed onto the floor, curling into a ball, her knees drawn up to her chest. I tried to comfort her, but she pushed me away, screaming. The motel walls were thin, and I was terrified someone would call security. I turned off all the lights and the TV, making the room as quiet as possible. The only sound was Mia's ragged breathing and occasional whimpers. Eventually, her screams turned to whimpers, then silence. She crawled into the closet and shut the door. I sat outside it, talking softly, telling her it was okay, that I wasn't mad. The only word she said for the next 2 days was, "Sorry," whispered over and over like a mantra. She stopped eating. She wouldn't look at me. She spent hours just sitting in that closet, rocking back and forth, her fingers fluttering at her sides. I was scared I was losing her. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't afford to keep staying at the motel, and I definitely couldn't afford the kind of specialized help she needed. That's when I got the text from Leah. It came out of nowhere, 3 days after our confrontation. "I think we should talk." I didn't know what Rob was doing. I kicked him out. "Mia can come back. I'll pay for therapy." I stared at the message for a long time, the blue light illuminating my face in the darkened motel room. Part of me wanted to tell her to go to hell, but another part was desperate. I was running out of money. Mia needed stability, therapy, proper care. I couldn't provide that while living in a motel and missing work. I agreed to meet Leah at a diner the next day. I left Mia with the librarian who had been kind to her over the past few days. The woman seemed to understand Mia's condition and had been letting her sit in the quiet reading corner for hours, bringing her books about space and dinosaurs without making her talk. Leah showed up looking like a mess. Her hair was unwashed, pulled back in a hasty ponytail, and she had what looked like a bruise on her cheekbone, partially covered with makeup. She slid into the booth across from me, her hands shaking slightly as she reached for the menu. "He hit me too," she said before I could even speak. "I had no idea he was hurting Mia. I thought she was making it up because she wanted to go back to you." She started crying, mascara running down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry, Jack. I should have believed her. I wanted to be angry, but seeing her like this, I believed her. Maybe she really didn't know. Maybe Rob had manipulated her too." The bruise on her face certainly suggested as much. "What about the guardianship papers? The Facebook post?" She wiped her eyes with a napkin, leaving black smudges. "I was scared. I thought you were trying to take her away because you didn't trust me. I overreacted. I'll withdraw the guardianship petition." We talked for over an hour. She seemed genuinely remorseful. She told me she'd filed for divorce, that Rob was staying with his brother. She promised Mia would be safe now, that she'd make it up to her, to both of us. "Let her come say goodbye to Emma at least," Leah suggested, mentioning her own daughter who was about Mia's age. "The girls got along so well, and you can see the house. Make sure Rob is really gone." It seemed reasonable. I agreed to let Mia spend one night there to say goodbye to her cousin. Leah even suggested I could pick her up from school the next day, so we could talk about a more permanent arrangement. Maybe I could move in for a while, help Mia adjust. It all sounded so perfect, so hopeful. I should have known it was too good to be true. The next morning, I got another text from Leah. "Don't contact me or Mia again. She's where she belongs." My blood ran cold. I drove straight to Leah's house, tires screeching as I pulled into the driveway. I pounded on the door until my knuckles were raw, but no one answered. I called Mia's school, only to be told that she had been officially re-enrolled under Aunt Leah's guardianship. The secretary mentioned something about signed paperwork submitted the previous evening. That's when it hit me. Leah must have taken documents from my bag at the diner. I always carried Mia's school forms and medical records with me. She had forged my signature. I spent the next few days in a daze. I slept in my car outside the school, watching for Mia. I missed so much work that I got fired. I didn't care. All I cared about was getting my sister back. Finally, one afternoon, I saw her being picked up by Leah. I almost ran over to them, but something stopped me. Mia looked different. She was walking with her head down, not making any of her usual happy movements. No hand flapping, no skipping, no humming. When she got in the car, she looked out the window right at me, but she didn't wave or smile. Her eyes looked hollow, empty. I knew something was very wrong. I started digging into Leah and Rob's background. I found out Rob had a record, nothing involving children, just a couple of DUIs and a bar fight, but it was enough to make me even more worried about Mia. I needed evidence, real evidence that couldn't be dismissed. That's when I came up with a plan. It was risky, possibly illegal, but I was desperate. I bought a cheap stuffed bear from Walmart. I carefully cut open the back, inserted a small voice-activated recording device, and stitched it back up. Then I went to see Mrs. Patel, Mia's old school counselor who had helped with her diagnosis. I explained everything that had happened. She was horrified but cautious about getting involved. I showed her pictures of Mia from before, videos of her stimming happily, being herself. Then I described how she looked now, subdued, frightened, empty. "I just need to know she's safe," I pleaded. "If everything's fine, I'll leave them alone, but I need to be sure." Mrs. Patel agreed to help. She called Leah and said she was implementing a new therapy technique for students with special needs, comfort objects that help them transition between home and school. She said she'd selected Mia for the pilot program. Leah, probably wanting to appear cooperative, agreed. The next day, Mrs. Patel gave Mia the bear, explaining that she should take it everywhere with her for the next few days. Mia clutched it to her chest immediately. I wondered if she somehow knew I had sent it. For 3 agonizing days, I waited. Then Mrs. Patel called me to her office after school hours to retrieve the bear. My hands were shaking as I carefully extracted the recording device. What I heard made me physically sick. The verbal abuse was constant. Leah calling Mia R-worded, broken, a burden. Rob's voice appearing in the evenings, despite Leah's claim that he had moved out. The sounds of Mia crying, begging to be left alone. And then, most chillingly, Rob's voice saying, "You're lucky I'm only using fists this time." Leah's voice chimed in seconds later, "Don't get blood on the carpet this time." I copied the files immediately, making multiple backups. Then I edited the clips into a time-stamped audio file. I removed any parts where my voice might be heard explaining the plan to Mia, if she had figured it out, leaving only the clear evidence of abuse. Then I sent it anonymously to the entire school board, several parents I found on the PTA contact list, and the principal. I included a note explaining that this was happening to a student at their school, and that authorities needed to be contacted immediately. The next day, Mrs. Patel called me. Her voice was shaking. Child Protective Services showed up today. They took Mia from class. Leah came in screaming, but they wouldn't let her near Mia. I thanked her and hung up, already racing to my car. I drove straight to the CPS office. When I arrived, a caseworker was waiting for me. They had identified me from school records as Mia's brother. They had questions, lots of them, but first they let me see her. I expected her to run to me, to be relieved. But when I entered the room, she just stared blankly. She was sitting perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, not rocking, not stimming, not being Mia. "Hey, Mia Bug," I said, using my old nickname for her. "It's me, Jack." She looked at me, but there was no recognition in her eyes. "Hello," she said flatly. The caseworker pulled me aside and explained that they suspected Leah and Rob had been medicating Mia. They found unmarked bottles of what Leah called herbal sleep drops that they had been giving her every night. The preliminary tests showed they contained sedatives that would dull emotions and memory. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. They had been drugging her. That's why she looked so empty when I saw her at school. They were literally suppressing everything that made her Mia. The caseworker told me they were building a case against Leah and Rob. The recordings, combined with the drugging and Mia's physical condition, she had bruises on her arms and back, were enough for them to remove her from the home permanently. But they needed to know why I hadn't come forward sooner, why I had left her there in the first place. I told them everything, about our parents, about how I'd been trying to protect Mia for years, about how Leah had manipulated and tricked me. I showed them texts, explained about the forged guardianship papers. I admitted to the recording device in the bear, expecting to be in trouble for that, but the caseworker just nodded. "You did what you had to do to protect your sister. That's all that matters now." It took almost 2 weeks for the substances to fully leave Mia's system. Those were the hardest days of my life. I stayed with her in a temporary foster placement approved by CPS. The family was nice enough, but Mia just sat there like a zombie most of the time. She barely ate, barely spoke. I kept wondering if I'd gotten to her too late, if the real Mia was gone forever. The caseworker, Ms. Winters, visited every other day. She had this gentle way of talking to Mia that sometimes got tiny responses. A nod, a one-word answer. It wasn't much, but it was something. Ms. Winters told me to be patient, that the medication would take time to wear off completely. "The brain is resilient," she said one afternoon while Mia napped on the couch. "Especially children's brains. She'll come back to us." I wanted to believe her, but it was hard when I looked at my sister's blank face. Where was the girl who used to flap her hands excitedly when we talked about dinosaurs? Who hummed the Cinderella soundtrack under her breath when she thought no one was listening? On day 9, I brought Mia her favorite breakfast, chocolate chip pancakes shaped like Mickey Mouse. I'd been making her favorites every day, hoping something would spark a reaction. She'd been eating mechanically, not really tasting anything. But that morning, she looked at the plate and frowned. "What's wrong?" I asked, my heart sinking. "Don't you want pancakes?" She poked at them with her fork. "The chocolate chips, they're touching the edges." I stared at her, not understanding. "Is that bad?" "They can't touch the edges," she said, her voice flat but insistent. "They have to stay in the middle." I almost cried right there at the kitchen table. This was pure Mia. Before all this happened, she always arranged her chocolate chips carefully, making patterns in the center of her pancakes. She'd never eat them if the chocolate touched the edges. It was one of her things. "I'm sorry," I said, already standing to make new ones. "I'll fix it." As I turned to go back to the stove, I felt a small tug on my sleeve. Mia was looking up at me, a tiny crease between her eyebrows. "Jack? Yeah? Mia Bug? Where are we?" That's when I knew she was coming back to us. Slowly, in bits and pieces, but coming back. The next few days showed more improvement. She started stimming again, little hand flaps when she got excited about something on TV. She asked for her noise-canceling headphones when the foster mom's vacuum cleaner got too loud. She even had a meltdown when we tried to change her routine one morning, which sounds weird to be happy about, but it meant she was feeling things again, being herself. Meanwhile, the case against Leah and Rob was building. Ms. Winters kept me updated. The recordings had been authenticated by forensic experts. The medication bottles had been tested and found to contain prescription sedatives that neither Leah nor Rob had prescriptions for. And most damning of all, Mia had started talking. Once she began to remember what happened, the details came out in fragments. How Rob would hit her when she stimmed. How Leah would force her to make eye contact for training sessions that lasted hours. How they'd make her sit perfectly still at dinner, and if she moved or made noise, she wouldn't be allowed to eat. Each new revelation made me want to drive over there and hurt them both, but I channeled that anger into helping Mia instead. I worked with her therapist on coping strategies. I created visual schedules so she'd always know what to expect each day. I read up on sensory processing issues and made sure our environment was as comfortable as possible for her. About a month after everything went down, I got a call from from Ms. Winters. "Rob's been arrested," she said without preamble. "Child abuse charges. The DA thinks they have enough for aggravated assault too, given the severity of some of Mia's bruising." I felt a weight lift off my chest. "What about Leah?" "She's cooperating with prosecutors. Claims she was also abused, that she was afraid to stop him." Ms. Winters' tone made it clear what she thought of that defense. "She'll likely get a plea deal with probation, mandatory counseling, and a permanent restraining order keeping her away from Mia." It wasn't perfect justice, but it was something. Rob would face real consequences. Leah would never be allowed near my sister again. It was more than I'd dared hope for when this all started. The next hurdle was figuring out where Mia would live permanently. I was only 20, with no stable housing and no job since I'd been fired during all this chaos. Our parents were obviously not an option. Foster care long-term seemed like the only choice, but the thought of Mia being placed with strangers made my stomach knot up. That's when Mrs. Patel, the school counselor who'd helped us from the beginning, stepped in with an idea. "What if you applied for guardianship?" she suggested during one of our check-in meetings. "You're young, but you're an adult. You've been Mia's primary caregiver for years anyway, from what you've told me." I shook my head. "They'd never give guardianship to a broke, unemployed 20-year-old. Not as you are now, maybe," she agreed. "But what if you had a job and a place to live? What if you had a support system?" That conversation led to a plan. Mrs. Patel's husband owned a small landscaping business and needed help with office work. The pay wasn't great, but it was steady. They also had a mother-in-law suite above their garage that they offered to rent to me at a reduced rate. It would be tight, but Mia and I could make it work. With Mrs. Patel's help, I put together a case for guardianship. I gathered character references from teachers who'd seen me pick Mia up from school for years, from neighbors who'd watched me take care of her when our parents checked out, even from my old boss, who wrote about how I'd worked overtime to pay for Mia's therapy. The hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in early May. I wore the only nice clothes I owned, khakis and a button-up shirt I'd bought for a high school presentation. Mia sat beside me in a dress she'd picked out herself, purple with dinosaurs on it. She was stimming more than usual, her fingers tapping rapidly against her thigh, but she was trying so hard to be brave. The judge was an older woman with silver hair and reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. She reviewed our file carefully, asking questions about my plans for Mia's education, therapy, and care. I answered as honestly as I could, explaining that while I didn't have much, I had a job lined up, a place to live, and people willing to help us. "And what about your own future?" she asked, peering at me over those glasses. "College? Career? Most 20-year-olds aren't ready to be full-time parents." I looked at Mia, who was now rocking slightly in her seat, her eyes fixed on the pattern in the carpet. "With all due respect, Your Honor, I've been taking care of my sister since I was 14. I can take online classes if I want to go to college. I can build a career around her needs. What I can't do is let her down." The judge nodded slowly, making a note in our file. "And you, young lady," she said, addressing Mia directly, "where do you want to live?" Mia looked up, startled at being spoken to. She glanced at me, then back at the judge. "With Jack," she said quietly. "He knows about the chocolate chips." The judge looked confused, but I had to bite my lip to keep from smiling. It was such a Mia thing to say. In her mind, that simple fact, that I knew how she liked her pancakes, was the most important qualification for being her guardian. To my surprise, the judge smiled too. "Well, that seems like a very important consideration." She closed our file and removed her glasses. "I'm granting temporary guardianship for 6 months with monthly check-ins from CPS. If all goes well, we'll revisit permanent guardianship at that time." Just like that, Mia was officially in my care. No more temporary placements, no more uncertainty. We were a family, small and unconventional, but a family nonetheless. The next few months were hard, but good. I started my job at the landscaping company, mostly answering phones and scheduling appointments. Mrs. Patel helped me enroll Mia in a school with better support for kids with autism. We moved into the apartment above the garage, which Mia declared was like a treehouse but better, because it had its own bathroom. We developed routines: chocolate chip pancakes, properly made, on Saturdays, library visits on Sundays, therapy on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I learned to recognize the signs of an impending meltdown, and how to create a calming environment when one happened anyway. Mia learned that it was okay to stim, to be herself, that no one would punish her for being autistic. There were setbacks, of course. Nights when she woke up screaming from nightmares about Rob. Days when she refused to go to school because she was convinced Leah would be waiting to take her away again. But we worked through each challenge together. 6 months after the temporary guardianship was granted, we went back to court. This time, I had pay stubs showing steady employment, reports from Mia's teachers about her progress, notes from her therapist about how well she was adjusting. The judge granted permanent guardianship without hesitation. As for Rob and Leah, justice played out mostly in the background of our lives. Rob took a plea deal to avoid trial and got 8 years for child abuse and assault. Leah got probation and community service, just as Ms. Winters had predicted. Neither of them would ever be allowed contact with Mia again. Their daughter Emma was placed with Leah's parents, who seemed like decent people. I sometimes wondered if we should try to maintain that connection for Mia's sake, but her therapist advised against it for now. Maybe someday, when the wounds weren't so fresh. Our parents never tried to contact us. I heard through distant relatives that they'd moved to some commune in Oregon. It was better that way. A year after everything happened, I built Mia a small garden in the backyard of Mrs. Patel's house. Nothing fancy, just some raised beds where she could grow sunflowers and cherry tomatoes. She loved digging in the dirt, arranging the plants in precise patterns that made sense only to her. It became her happy place. One evening, I brought her a snack while she was painting watercolors at her little table in the garden. The sun sun was setting, casting everything in a warm glow. She had her headphones on, lost in her own world of color and creation. I set the plate of apple slices, arranged in a perfect circle, not touching, beside her and turned to go, not wanting to interrupt her focus. But she reached out and grabbed my hand. "Jack?" she said, lifting one side of her headphones. "Yeah, Mia Bug? I'm happy here." 3 simple words, but they meant everything. After all we'd been through, all the fear and pain and uncertainty, my sister was happy, safe, herself. "Me too, kid," I said, squeezing her hand gently. "Me too." She went back to her painting, humming softly under her breath. It was the Cinderella soundtrack, just like old times.